partiers come Trumplicans out there, let me tell you something. Let me teach you something about politics, specifically about unifying the party after the primary season. The job of unifying the party after primary season belongs to the nominee. It is incumbent upon the nominee, no pun intended, to reach out to the portion of his party's nominating electorate that didn't support him and mend fences, be conciliatory, bring them, welcome them into the fold, persuade them. Politics in a constitutional republic is about persuasion, not coercion, not command. It's not an entitlement. Party unity, closing ranks, that's not an entitlement. The nominee can't demand it. It's the job of the nominee to reach out to those who didn't vote for him. Persuade them. Mend fences. Bury the hatchet. That's what Trump refuses to do, still refuses to do. Trumplicans refuse to do that. And this matters because, as you've seen in the last week or two, Donald Trump's poll numbers have collapsed. He's now 7 or 8 points behind on average in national polls. He's behind in the Electoral College by a 2-to-1 margin. He has fallen off drastically with independent voters, and he is not attracting even 3/4 of the support of the party that nominated him. In other words, as Leon Wolf points out today at Red State, yes, Trump does need conservative votes. His supporters should try something other than threats or peer pressure to get them. There are two things that are driving Trump's recent nosedive in the polls. The first is that he has lost support, as I say, among independent voters. The second is that he has lost support amongst the registered voters of the Republican Party, the party that nominated him, foolishly. Trump cannot survive either of these things, let alone both, at the same time, and both problems must be fixed if he is going to have a chance to win. And I would think Trumplicans would actually give a damn about that. But maybe they don't. Maybe they just want to bitch and moan and complain and finger point and fight, fight, fight all the wrong people. That's what they do. Yeah, I use the same term as the previous video because it applies. The dynamic in recent presidential elections has been remarkably static. The Democrat candidate wins the registered Democrat vote by a margin of about 90-9. Now the Republican candidate wins the registered Republican vote by about the same margin. Victory is achieved by some combination of turning out your base more efficiently than the other guy and winning the independent vote. As noted recently, Trump is not doing that. Recent polls show that Trump has been getting less, under 80% of registered Republicans and an even smaller number of self-identified conservatives. This by itself would ordinarily be fatal to the presidential aspirations of any general election candidate, but Trump has been polling lower than average among members of his own party since, members of the party that nominated him. His own party is the Democrats. Let's just make sure we phrase this correctly. Since day one, although he reached a high point of about 85% Republican support right after the convention, which coincided with the one brief lead he held in the polls. One brief, tiny, basically he was tied. That's what it amounts to. Now, Trump has stayed competitive in this race because he has done well with independents, but that lead has crumbled, and the end result is that he's fallen behind into landslide territory. Landslide territory that may well take the Republican congressional majorities along with him. The simple fact is that Trump needs to reverse both trends if he is going to manage a lead that will be in any way sustainable. Trump simply cannot manage to sustain the 20-point lead with independents that he will need if he continues to hemorrhage 20% of his own of the party that nominated him. In spite of his bluster to the contrary, Trump does need the conservative voters whom he lost in the primary. He needs never Trump to become, at the very least, maybe Trump, and lots of luck with that. We know better. There's a reason he knelt at the altar of Paul Ryan and John McCain last weekend, even though doing so angered some of his most prominent early supporters. His more intelligent supporters know it too, which is why they've transitioned from mocking Never Trump as an insignificant movement that will make no difference in the election to attempting to convince Never Trump to abandon their stance and sell out to Trump. Except the only tools of persuasion they have in their arsenal seem to be peer pressure and intimidation. You know, but Hillary! The first of these takes the form of, "You're helping Hillary win," or some other variant of, "You're letting the team down," or "I won't be friends with you anymore if you don't vote the way I want." Well, here's a news flash, Trumplicans. This is a repeating topic in these videos on my channel, but hey, and on my podcast, but this is what you need to hear and need to come to grips with and need to understand, acknowledge, and accept. A necessary precursor to becoming Never Trump is reaching the conclusion that Trump is either as bad or worse than Hillary, which he is, or at the very least insufficiently better than her to merit your vote. Telling such a person, "You're helping Hillary win," which is not true, is like trying to talk someone out of buying a Ferrari by telling them that it drives very fast. The other thing they try is flat-out intimidation. Thinly veiled threats like, "We'll remember who stood with us and who won't, who didn't," and calling us traitors. Oh boy, the pot calling the kettle black. Or not veiled at all threats are thrown at everyone in the Never Trump movement by Trump supporters on Twitter and Facebook every day. Trump and his supporters have tried these two tactics to death since their Cheeto-dusted demigod sewed up the nomination on May 3rd. It's now 3 months later, August the 9th. If get in line, Trump won, and you're helping Hillary, and we'll remember those who opposed us, haven't worked by now, they never will. Figure it out. Here's an idea. Try treating lifelong Republicans and conservatives who are resistant to voting for Trump like fully grown adults. You know, the things that Trumplicans are not. Who long ago learned how to resist peer pressure and stick to their beliefs. And if you're a true conservative, you know all about resisting peer pressure and sticking to your beliefs, which is why Trumplicans are not conservatives, never were. Try to imagine that they might have already thought through the possible consequences of their vote, and indeed that having done so is what led them to this position in the first place. Try to actually engage substantively with the objections to Trump, which I've yet to see any Trumplican do, which are not exclusively or even necessarily related to ideological purity, although that's part of it, and are not at all caused by sour grapes. In other words, "Oh, your candidate didn't win in the primary, well, get over it," and never had anything to do with that. If you read my writings about Donald Trump from June 15th of last year, you would be aware that I have never changed my line, my position, my tone, my take on the Trump candidacy from day one. It's always remained the same. It is unchanged. It is immutable. It is set in stone. And it's correct. But are instead rooted in the conviction, based on recent experience and Donald Trump's track record over the past 40 years as a public figure, that nothing Trump says can be believed. And that he, as a person, would be a walking time bomb if he actually occupied the Oval Office. Find some way to reassure voters, lots of luck on this, by the way, who are most assuredly do not want Hillary Clinton to become president, that Trump has it in him to actually do this job in a way that wouldn't materially harm the country and indeed the world at large. Again, as I say, lots of luck with that. Do not assume that repeatedly pointing at Hillary and braying will get the job done, because it won't. We've been watching Hillary Clinton for 25 years now. You're not surprising us by telling us that she's bad. Convince us that Trump is good, or at least less bad, and do it with facts. And of course, they can't do that, and they won't. I mean, it's no skin off my teeth if he loses. But you should realize by now that what you're doing is not working and will in fact contribute to his loss in November. When Trump loses, it will be all your fault. Now let's revisit a recent example of this phenomenon from the past week. Namely, Sean Hannity's meltdown on his radio program and also on Twitter. The only difference between the two being that on Twitter he used, shall we say, some blue language, but otherwise, same idea. They're very much like his Cheeto-dusted demigod. After some skillful trolling by Brett Stevens of the Wall Street Journal, and I'm pretty sure that Stevens did that trolling on Twitter in order to generate precisely the sort of reaction, the sort of poking at a cultist who drunk the Kool-Aid reaction that he knew he was going to get from Hannity after, for daring to question Donald Trump. Now, it was probably inevitable, Stevens writes today at the Wall Street Journal, that Donald Trump and his media munchkins would alight on the stab in the back theory to explain his inevitable defeat in November. The surprise is that they are doing so with the election still 3 months out. Now remember what, here's the quote, Hannity from last week on his radio program. Quote, "If in 96 days Trump loses this election, I am pointing the finger." He actually used that phrase, pointing the finger. "I am pointing the finger directly at people like Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham and John McCain and John Kasich and Ted Cruz." Ted Cruz, that noted establishmentarian and charter member of the Washington cartel. God. Hannity told his radio audience last week, "I have watched these Republicans be more harsh toward Donald Trump than they've ever been in standing up to Barack Obama and his radical agenda," which is not true. It's not remotely true, actually. Establishment Republican types, who, by the way, are now Donald Trump's personal gerbil herd, if you follow my drift, Hannity insisted, had in effect created Donald Trump. Hannity has never made a secret of his bromantic feelings for Donald Trump, which is the love that dares to speak its name. In fact, it demands to speak its name. But his comments were also a revelation, and not just that it had dawned on him that the Republican nominee is almost certain to lose, and lose big. Like members of a cult, who discover too late that their self-proclaimed Messiah is mortal after all, rationalizations are required because of the aforementioned emotional investment. When you follow a candidate based on nothing more than emotion, no facts, no evidence, then you invest that emotion in it, and you can't defend yourself after it's exposed as being foolishness. And so you just gotta, just like in the case of Trumplicans, just like their leader, their dear leader, their father figure, demigod, whatever, they start making things up. It's like he does. Trump has lately been road testing one such rationalization, saying the election will be rigged. Voter fraud is a reality in American elections, but it is typical of the candidate to confuse anecdote with data and turn allegation into conspiracy. Trump also says the media is rigged against him, which is amusing coming from the beneficiary of the equivalent of $3 billion in free advertising during the primary campaign. And that, of course, is because the media wanted to impose Donald Trump on the GOP as its presidential nominee because he was the only candidate in the race that Hillary Clinton could beat. Because the job of the media is to get the Democrat elected. Period. End of story. This used to be common knowledge on the right, but Trumplicans are no longer on the right, are they? Hannity's excuses are even more disgraceful, combining oily self-absolution with venomous obloquy for the very conservatives who have spent the year warning that a Trump candidacy is an epic GOP disaster that all but guarantees Hillary Clinton's election. Yeah, I'm one of those conservatives. The habit of shifting blame and refusing to take responsibility is supposed to be the curse of the underclass and its political hucksters. In other words, the left. But Hannity is giving Al Sharpton a run for his money. Aside from setting off riots, but then campaign is young, isn't it? Hannity's other goal is to preserve the fiction, first cultivated by Ted Cruz and later adopted by the Trumplicans, that a wan GOP establishment and its Asila corridor voters sat on their hands while Obama traduced the Constitution and sold us out to the enemy. They did nothing! Nothing! The anchor fumed Thursday on his show. All these phony votes to repeal and replace Obama. Phony? How are they phony? They were real as roast beef. It's just Barack Obama has the veto. Show votes so they can go back and keep their powder and get reelected. Yeah, every politician wants to do that. So what's your point? Maybe Hannity thinks that Speaker Ryan and Majority Leader McConnell should have jumped the White House fence and stuck a pitchfork in the one. Or that they should have amended the Constitution to repeal Article 1, Section 7, the one that gives the president his veto. Otherwise, it's hard to understand the constant lament about a do-nothing Congress, except by wondering whether Hannity is stupid or dishonest or both. On Thursday evening, I opted to give him the benefit of the doubt by writing on Twitter, Mr. Stevens writes, that Hannity was Fox's dumbest anchor. He immediately proved my point by retweeting me to his 1.5 million Twitter followers, thus generating a hate storm, no doubt. An audience I could never have reached on my own. Later on the radio, he called me a dumbass with his head up his ass. Wow, that went out on the radio, huh? Whoa, look who's thin-skinned, just like his Cheeto-dusted demigod, demonstrating he can't even swear competently. But Hannity's tantrum obscures the uglier side of what he is trying to do. which is to paint targets on the GOP's genuine Reaganites. I'm holding up my hand again. Pro-trade, pro-immigration, pro-NATO, pro-entitlement reform. I'm not so sure about the pro-immigration part, but the others definitely. And replace them with the party of Trump, the American National Socialist Party, in effect. Anti all of the above, so anti-trade, anti-prosperity, anti-NATO, isolationist, pro-war, anti-entitlement reform, so pro-bankruptcy. None of those are conservative values, no matter what happens to the candidate come November. Now, who might help lead this unglorious revolution of the crass, clueless, and shoulder-chipped? Those who can make themselves rich by shouting and hearing echoes of themselves, even as the GOP loses one presidential election after another. This is the reason I've consistently argued, that the only hope for a conservative restoration is a blowout Hillary Clinton victory held in check by a Republican majority in Congress. And yeah, I know what you're going to say. Well, you've said for years that you don't win by losing. Well, this is the exception that proves the rule. Because we don't have Mitt Romney, we don't have John McCain, we don't have a Bush. We have a Democrat as the Republican nominee. Wake up, Trumplicans. If Trump loses the election narrowly, the stab in the back thesis will have a patina of credibility that he might have won had it not been for the opposition of people like Never Trump. But a McGovern-style defeat, or even a McCain-magnitude defeat, makes that argument impossible. Not that they wouldn't argue it anyway. To sustain, except among the most cretinous. We can count on Hannity for that, and boy, I know some Trumplicans that fall in that category as well. Now, last week, Bret Stephens appeared on Fareed Zakaria's CNN show, opposite a Trump supporter named Emily Miller. At the end of the show, I said Americans deserved a president who can speak grammatical English. Miller retorted that it was snobby of me to say so. Oh, really? To be well-spoken? To give the impression that you're actually literate is snobby, huh? Well, there's populism for you. I mean, the headline to this Bret Stephens column at the Wall Street Journal is Sean Hannity's Veneration of Ignorance. Veneration of ignorance. That nails it, doesn't it? There was a time when the conservative movement was led by the likes of Bill Buckley, Irving Kristol, and Bob Bartley, men of ideas who invested the Republican Party with intellectual seriousness. Today's GOP is on the road to self-immolation, thanks in part to the veneration of ignorance typified by Miss Miller and Sean Hannity. As conservatives grow through their pre- and post-mortems, they should think about the damage that such veneration can do and has already done.